Thing that you said that stuck out to me was that Tether is somewhat shadowy. And when I'm thinking about where I want to put my money, it's not somewhere shadowy. So how is this allowed?
So it's allowed because it's hard for one regulator, especially for a company like Tether that operates around the world, to sort of um, get dominance. I mean, Tether has run into regulatory troubles in the past. They've been sued by the CFTC. They've had to settle with them because one relatively infamous incident back in 2019. Tether's sister exchange, which shares the same leadership hierarchy as Tether, had $850 million in customer deposits locked up at a payment processor that was kind of seen as also shady, called Crypto Capital, and they borrowed $850 million of collateral from Tether to help make sure that the exchange, called Bitfinex, would be able to meet customer withdrawals. I mean, that's a very big no-no in the world of stablecoins, which is what Tether is, because collateral is supposed to be sacrosanct and never used for any purpose other than being redeemable for users if they want to trade in those tokens. So that's just one example. But again, they've never provided a definitive audit. Oftentimes they claim but they've never provided a definitive audit. And oftentimes when they get criticism, and there's a lot, I mean, there are some very public short firms out there that are shorting Tether. There's been lots of investigations into Tether. We did a profile on them back in December, and they also make the argument that uh, people think that because they are so successful, that no matter what they do, someone's going to find a problem with it. The goalposts are always going to move, and all of Tether's top four executives are European. Most of them are Italian. And Paolo Arduino, the chief technology officer who spoke to us for the profile we did back in December, basically said something akin to the belief that because they did not go to Ivy League schools and because they didn't grow up on Wall Street, they don't know what they're doing. Whereas if you look at the great financial crisis and some of the other major crises out there, they were all created by Wall Street types. So they certainly think that there's a bit of a double standard. But that said, there's certainly much more that they could do as far as disclosures if they wanted to prove themselves to be completely transparent. To be fair to Tether, though, there have been for years short sellers and critics saying that it's all vaporware. They're minting these tokens without accurate collateral. They've done, and that at some point it's a house of cards. It's all going to come falling down. But they have passed every single test that they ever faced. A big one happened in May of last year when a $45 billion stablecoin ecosystem called Terra Luna crashed, and Tether had to process $16 billion of withdrawals in a matter of days, and they did it without a hiccup. Then, when FTX collapsed back in November, they had to process billions of dollars in withdrawals again, no issues. And those were two periods where a lot of the critics were sort of circling in, expecting Tether to be the biggest domino to fall, but it never happened.
Executives at Tether are saying that the goalposts are always moving. And you and I have talked about a lot how crypto is almost like the Wild West without regulations. Congress is continuing to work on legislation in the crypto space. Would that negatively impact Tether, positively impact Tether? What would potential legislation look like?
Yeah, that's a good question because there is a lot of attention focused on stablecoin legislation. I was actually in Washington D.C. on Friday, where I met with some key leaders on the Hill, particularly members of the House Financial Services Committee, and I mean they are optimistic that a piece of stablecoin legislation will pass in this Congress, and that would kind of help provide some certainty to the industry because it would sort of set terms for like auditing standards, like what qualifies as a stablecoin, what doesn't, who are the authorized issuers, banks versus non-banks, what are the roles of state versus federal regulators, and even more basic uh, concepts such as what type of collateral can be used to back up a stablecoin. All of that is great, but I think it'd be more impactful for companies like Circle and other U.S. based firms because Tether, again, they're not based in the U.S. and they geofence around the U.S. I mean, they try to stay outside of that market. So that type of legislation may not have as much of a direct impact on how Tether operates. However, the one thing that could change is if there is more certainty surrounding how stablecoins can operate, that could encourage big banks to come in and launch their own competing stablecoins. I mean, one big vulnerability in Tether's business model is that when they get these dollars, they pay zero interest and they're free to invest them essentially however they want. So they're sitting on what is essentially an 83 or $84 billion interest free loan that they then invest in safe assets that provide a 5% return. Uh, and at some point, I do wonder if investors are going to start wondering, why is Tether getting so rich? Why can't we share some of that yield? An answer that Tether and other stablecoin issuers might say is, well, you can take those dollars and then invest them in DeFi or somewhere else to generate your own yield, but that creates an extra step and other risk for the investors. The real challenge, though, is if they start paying out yield, then becomes much more likely those assets become would be termed securities, and that creates a whole other set of issues. But I think the bigger concern related to stablecoin legislation is if, and Paolo actually said this to us when we interviewed him, like JP Morgan, Wells Fargo, the biggest banks in the US, if they decided they wanted to launch a competitor to Tether, they could blow them out of the water in a second. It just depends on if they want to take on that risk and that hurdle.